But from the utility perspective, we aim to stay on top of these items so that we never get ourselves into that position. And those kinds of things take rates and fees to pay for pump replacement in a timely manner, chemical storage and feed tanks being safe and sound. And on the wastewater side, manholes that the flow doesn't rise up to within 6 inches and threaten to overtop. All of these things, Lindsay, these are catastrophic accidents. We do our best to never even get close.
Dave, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines as Lindsay. I mean, I understand hypothetically what you're saying, but I don't even understand why it's part of our discussion today, because I don't feel that the city's been in that position that we've ever underfunded to a point where we're just waiting for the lid to blow off, so to speak. I mean, the mayor's been, on multiple councils, and I know that their councils funded stuff. So I just, I understand hypothetically it's important to understand why we take care of the infrastructure, but I think, well, what I got out of Lindsay's point is that's not where I've seen us be as a city. And I've lived here my entire life. I've never heard that we're having issues where, that's what's around the bend, nor talking to people who have been here before this council or this staff that, they've been funding stuff. Maybe the cadence that this group's decided to do is something different. But I guess that's what I get out of it. So I'm a little, just don't understand the extreme examples.
So the question, and maybe this is my fault, that I heard from some of you was just wanting to understand how bad could bad get. So I phrased the question this way as the worst case. So I think Julie's just answering the question as I had described it. But I think, Dave, what I hear from you and from Lindsay, like, this is also part of the conversation that you can have, right? Is and we talked about this in the presentation in my slides last time, of some people have different comfort with risk and how low is too low and how far can you push the line on the repairs. And that's part of what you can talk about as council is, I don't really think, maybe you think that the risk there on that far left side doesn't feel like a real risk for all the reasons that you said. And then, okay, so then maybe you want to play the risk card a little bit farther. Other people might feel differently. So that's part
I think that's fair, but I think, there are residents who are listening, and I don't want a misconception of where the city is or where the city has been, unless you have some evidence that we've been in that place that I haven't seen before. I just think it's a valid point, and it's like I don't like. It seems like we've really spent a lot of time on the extreme of this is what could happen, and people boiling water. And yeah, we have never been there, because you know what? Councils before me have taken care of things, and I think that I want people to understand that, because I know people are listening to this.
Okay, Julie's nodding. Anita, you have a question? Go ahead. Oh, wait, you did.
To be clear, this slide doesn't say the spectrum of where Westminster has been. It was, what is the worst case scenario if we don't invest in our infrastructure? And we've never been in a time in our history before where we've had so much of our infrastructure aging out at the exact same time. So we are in a different scenario. We do benefit from a long line of stewardship of our system, but I think the last, if I remember correctly, what we talked about in the last one of these was how we had such a large percentage because we grew so much during the 70s and 80s, aging out at the same time. So it's just a different scenario than what we had. So that's me wanting to rephrase, because I don't feel anyone was trying to impugn former council members or say that we are currently in that increased failure or in threat of it, that far extreme. I did want to ask though, right now, what I thought I heard you say is that in routine failures is kind of where we're at right now. Did I hear you correct with that?
Yeah, because when we consider the design of certain infrastructure, we consider that we might have a failure of a thing. And that's normal. Sometimes we have multiple things that do the same job. That's why we have backup or reliability of things. And I want to be perfectly clear. And Anita and Dave, thank you both for clarifying on this. We do not live on the far left for a variety of reasons, including this excellent operations and maintenance staff and these stretched useful life aspects. City staff is incredibly diligent, technically creative, and so on it that I like what you said, Anita. This does not represent Westminster specifically. This is a spectrum of how I thought that I would respond to this question.
Heather.
And I want to clarify finally, I'm sorry, just my last question is we're also not to the extreme right of this because that represents an unconstrained model. And so what we've been doing, as I understood, was following based off of all of that criticality, vulnerability, all of the factors you discussed, doing those minimally responsible repairs. Am I understanding that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Herb, you have a question?
Not a question, I have a couple of comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, going back to Lindsay's question about the increased failures and violations. There have been times in the past where we have had breaks in our system that required us to notify CDPHE that we've had a break and what we were doing to mitigate those breaks, because the potential of contamination because of what was broken, typically lines of contaminated water getting into the pipelines into people's homes, did exist. Now, we may not have contaminated it to the point that it was going to require people to boil water and to use bottled water. But those things, we still had the same permit. We were still operating under the same EPA and CDPHE guidelines. But for that period of time during this, we had a violation. Now, because of the actions that we took, we may not have been fined, but we were put on notice and we recorded by state law the fact that we had a break or an incident. That protects us from not reporting. We have certain reporting requirements. So those things do happen. We have been very fortunate in the life of the history of the city, to Julie's point, that we never got to the point of having to put the city or portions of the city into a state of having to boil water because the water in the system between the break and your home got that infected. But you can't always play out the luck card to no extent. So those are things that they still have to deal with. Then to Dave's point, Dave, this council is in very fortunate position because I will tell you from my past history, as you pointed out, we have not always taken an aggressive stand of saying we need to do more long-term sustainability planning as a council, but we listened to what was presented for that typical budget cycle. And the constitution of past councils was, I really don't want to raise people's rate. And we didn't. We should have, based on where we're at today, because all we did was we kicked it down the road. Now we're at the road where the can can't be kicked any further.
So this is great. I want to hear your takeaways from this information. So one is we don't want to kick the can down the road any farther. Others are maybe the can is not quite so far down the road as we thought because of past investments. What other takeaways do you have? Do you have any other like levers that you think that we could identify that you as council could sort of play with when you think about the future? Anita, takeaway, thought, what do you got for me?
Well, I don't know if this is the right time to address it or not. And I'm really, Heather, please beat me back if this is not the right time, because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. But when I first got on council, I did a lot of tours, and I was very fortunate. Mike Cappy, Stu, Fineglass, a lot of people who were really built the reputation of Westminster and our water department really helped educate me. And when I did do a tour of the North West water treatment, I was told that it had originally been designed to be expanded. But because of budget crunches at the time, it was not designed that way. And because of that, it only can handle indoor consumption for Westminster. It's not large enough to handle our full consumption. And so that is why now when we're looking at purchasing, if I remember correctly, when we need a new water treatment plant, that we can't just shut Semper down and do it in situ, but that we actually have to find a new site and build from scratch. Is there, even if that example is wrong, and I want to know if it's wrong, I don't want to do that to them. I want to do things right, so we're giving future councils the most amount of options with the least amount of liabilities. But I also don't want to overburden our current residents. And so that story to me has always stuck in my head, because it felt like it saved the budget that year, but really has kind of, we inherited that. And so I don't know if that's folklore that I misunderstood and have misremembered and, convinced myself is true, or if that's accurate. But I guess I did want to explain that is part of that, not wanting to be penny wise and pound foolish, that has kind of stuck with me as a counselor.
The thing one, and I think that showed up as part of your interest when we talked about the interest for sure. Just want to double check, Julie, is that anecdote, is Anita's memory on the anecdote reliable?
I can confirm the indoor capacity aspect. I would have to go back and ask others if the intent was ever to expand Northwest, but I do know that they were under a very tight budget constraint. And I can corroborate the master planning activity for water treatment facilities showed that a new facility at a new site was the most advantageous to the city and not trying to construct at Semper. So I can confirm 3 out of 4, I think.
Okay. Catherine, you have a thought? Wait, you're muted. There you go.
Okay. Anita, I actually remember that too from the tour that John and I took of the Northwest Center. Now, I don't remember that that it was anticipated to be able to be expanded, but what I do remember is that it can't be expanded. And I do remember that it could handle indoor usage for something miraculous, like a year. It was incredible. And then when we got to Semper, they talked about how it was failing and how the parts were really expensive to replace, and that it wasn't serving our city like it should be, and that we needed a new system, an additional system. So yes, the tours have been just outstanding, and they really help you understand this utility in ways that you never imagined. My takeaways from this are that, when I was running, one of the things that I talked about was that I thought it was so important as a city not to be thinking about today or even just 5 years down the road, but to be thinking 20 and 50 years down the road. How are we going to sustain our system? And water is our most precious resource. And so when I look at this presentation, and Julie, I thought this presentation was awesome, but I think I've become a water nerd. So I just enjoy the details. I think I should have, I think I missed my calling in life, honestly. I should have been a water engineer.
There's still time.
There's still time. I don't know about that, but I will tell you, my friends at parties think that I'm quite entertaining when I get on the water subject. So, so for me, the water is the most precious resource we have. We have got to protect it. I desperately want to find a way that we can protect our utility, do the right thing for our future generations and our future city, but also manage rates that are going to be affordable for our residents. And this to me was information. And now I believe that we have a foundation for the conversation and that we can move from here. So I appreciate all the questions that have been asked and the comments that have been made. And I would like a copy of this presentation just so that I can bring it to parties with me, Julie, and really, really wows them.
You got it.
Everyone be mindful, if you're going to Catherine's party, you might want to bring an extra something to drink. Other reflections from council? Takeaways? Yeah, Rich?
I think, especially looking at the chart that's on the screen right now, I think there's, on everything in life, there's a spectrum, and everything in life, there's a trade-off. And so I think there's a pretty good understanding of that. And when do we balance costs? When do we spread costs by using bonding so that we can maintain generational equity? And then at what point do we place an excessive burden on certain ratepayers and not give equity throughout that use? So I'm going to save most of my comments for the cost of water and then equity discussions too. So, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Boy, are you going to dig the next presentation, man. If you feel about rate stuff the way Catherine feels about this slide deck, you are going to be a hoot at parties as well. Other reflections? John, any thoughts on this? Takeaways, big huzzahs, or more or less what you thought you knew? What are you thinking?
Oh, I thought it was good, good foundation. And yes, I think I knew a lot of this. That there was a question about reservoirs that was a little bit, I guess I might follow up on that later, that we don't have capacity, it sounded like. So I'd like to know more about that at some point, but we don't have to touch on that right now. But this was a good presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Other folks have big takeaways, thinking about what you might want to be carrying from this conversation forward when you start thinking about what ifs and future policy options for the city?
Bueller.
Yep, Lindsay?
Are you wanting me to be completely candid?
Yeah.
To be quite frank, the first two meetings, I feel like I've taken a lot of notes, and I feel like I've gotten some good information. However, I feel that we're not getting to the point, and I know that we're doing this in segments, and I'm one not to have a whole lot of patience. So I'm like, let's get her done right now. Like, let's go. I'm a doer, and so this is really pushing my structure. But I feel that partly some of the questions that I've asked, I don't feel completely comfortable repeating to the public as far as what was answered, because I just don't feel comfortable with the answer, and quite frankly, I don't know what would get me there. But I think one of the biggest takeaways, and I think Anita hit it, is the retention and really getting this into a condensed, solid answer as far as what we can tell and show our residents as far as everything that we are going through in these segments, to really understand where we're at. And that's the biggest thing that has been my point of contention, is that in this is not to question that we need to take care of our infrastructure or the quality of water, but the management of how we got here. That is my biggest sticky point that I don't feel that I have quite gotten confidence in just these two sessions. So I'm keeping an open mind. I'm still pushing forward and keeping my patience through this. So I appreciate you allowing us to answer a Q&A at points, so that's helpful. But I look forward to future discussions as far as like, okay, where are we going?
Right. Yeah. And so I'm glad you said that. And I think a couple of you really appreciated this, and a few of you maybe not, are getting kind of antsy. And so I appreciate your patience. And I think the goal, right, is that next when you start talking about rates and other trade-offs, as Rich was saying, and I think Anita was sort of leaning on that, sort of the trade-off conversation as well, is now we have a better understanding of what the system looks like and where the trade-offs might land in terms of infrastructure. So this was definitely foundational. All this, the really juicy stuff that y'all want to talk about on the rates, man, I'm telling you, you're going to be so jazzed about the next one. It's got a slide on every one of the things that you want to talk about. So thank you for your perseverance. The juicy conversation on the rate piece is coming, in part because there's more levers there for you to push as well. Or I think Chris told me I had to say pull levers, but I'm saying push levers. So I want to just make sure that you heard the same levers on infrastructure that I heard, so we carry those going forward. You do have some ability to think about levels of service and comfort of risk to those levels of service. That if you wanted to think about how far you push the useful life of stuff, right? The more you push, maybe you increase the risk a little bit. Maybe you want to talk about that. It could impact level of service. It could be a roll of the dice and maybe it'll be fine. And again, different people will come down differently on that line. So there's that sort of piece there. Again, the risk of failures and how big you see that risk and how far you're willing to push that. Part of this piece too is related to the CIP and how that's funded, which we'll talk about next time. But again, the way that staff thinks about it does relate to some of the assumptions that are embedded in this presentation about how they see the aging of the system, how they understand the need to replace, and that informs some of their out-year planning and thinking for infrastructure needs, which then informs how they think about the future cost need. So that's how all these pieces are going to carry forward. And so for you to know which of the pieces here you can kind of toggle with and how they're going to pop up in terms of the rate conversation later is super helpful. So levels of service. Oh, and Dave, you also brought up there's some assumptions about future costs and whether if we delay things, whether or not they'll actually cost more. That's another thing for you all to consider as part of your future conversation. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
I wanted to share my takeaways.
Yes, please.
What I'm taking away is we're still not getting to the conversation I've wanted to have for 3 years. You know, we can talk about, Herb, that things got kicked down the can, got kicked. I'd like to see the list of what got kicked. I'd like to see the list of violations that occurred. In 2013, I ran for office and I lost. After that election, council, who only one member is on this council now that was there, decreased tap rates. Decreased. So I just don't understand where when we had consistent rate increases, and if you look back over the last 20 years, they had, you know, for the last, you know, prior to the last, say, 6 years, they were doing 4%, 4%, 4% every year. Prior to that, they were doing double that every other year. So then they flattened it and then went every other year. And if I talk to former leadership, I'm told that they consistently were evaluating CIP programs and approving CIP programs. You know, you always have a budget. You say, this is what my budget is. What are my needs? Here are the most important needs that can fit in this bucket we call a budget, and we move forward with it. I just feel like, you know, that's what I'd really like to get to is to understand what was missed that caused us to have such a drastic change over the last 6 years. Because you can look, like I actually have a spreadsheet that shows all my bills from when I moved into this house in 2011 and the rate increase. And granted, I'm really good with my water. I let my backyard die because I was sick of water in it, to be frank. And I can tell you the increase, and it over, say, between 14 and now, the increase is a lot more drastic than the years before. And I understand there was a change in how we looked at it, but I've never really, I'd like to understand why. And beyond that, you know, my biggest takeaway, and it's not really a takeaway, I am very in line with Councillor Seymour as far as equability and how we are charging. It's not because I don't think it's important. I think water safety is one of our #1 priorities, and that, you know, falls into taking care of the infrastructure. But when we start seeing people who let their lawns die and it starts affecting property value, and we see people making real hard choices about things like medication versus water, which we can act like that's not happening, but it is happening. you know, that's where my concern lies. That's where my concern lied in 2018. That's where my concern continues to lie. So I'd like to get at that at a reasonable level where we're actually, and I hope, like you said, you're right, that in these future conversations, we're actually going to see how we could pull some levers responsibly and try to ease some of this burden off the residents.
You 100% are. So many levers in the future conversations, I promise. Go ahead, Anita.
So I just want to make clear, it seems like there's two conversations going on. One conversation is trying to understand all of the needs and tensions with our water system, how all of the cost drivers, the condition of our utility, all of this. And another is feeling like somehow a previous council is on trial here, or there's an implication that previous councils, previous managers, previous engineers didn't do their job. And I actually heard quite the opposite from Ms. Kohler, or rather from Julie, sorry, which was that she had a lot of respect and in her heart of hearts felt everyone did the best with the information that they had at the time. So what I have heard is that the situation has changed. We have more complete information because we hadn't done a deep system study since 2006, if I'm remembering that correctly, like age and condition study. And then 2, just we've aged as a community since then. And so I'll talk about it when we're at the rates, but I remember, I believe it was 2015 or 2016, and this actually goes to your point earlier, Councilor or Dave, which was sometimes your variables change enormously, and that was during the construction boom. And so previous council, which had done a good job wanting to have steady rate increases so they weren't so shocking, the index that they had connected it to no longer was matching the costs of how much more expensive things were, the construction costs, right? And so that's why we had to kind of change it. So some of those drivers, age and condition, and also construction costs had just changed. I don't think, I'm not going to say past councils are bad, but knowing what I know now, what are we going to do going forward? And I'd really like to focus on knowing what we know now. How are we going to go forward? I don't feel there's a lot of benefit in blaming a previous body or in protecting them. Let's focus on what is our responsibility. In my opinion, that's how I'd like to go forward.
And I would encourage you to think about it as of 2 pieces. One is what you've said, Anita, but also where there are things that, you know, if we had a do-over, we would have done it differently, knowing what we know now, and we can learn those lessons. We should also carry those forward. And that's a little bit what I hear in some of the other questions as well. So what are the lessons that we can learn? Carry those forward. But in the end, all the questions I'm going to ask you about, what do you want to do next on rates for the equity piece to balance all these components? That's all just forward looking. Because whatever happened has happened. We should learn from it, whatever it might be, and then figure out what y'all think are the choices for the future. So I'm really jazzed. Again, I'm kind of a nerd for different reasons, but I'm really jazzed for you to have the conversation that's going to start with the next slide deck. And I think it's going to get at these pieces. Dave, there's some information about the trend in rates, and we can start, and you can see the years and say, what happened right there? What happened in whatever the year that was? And so we can start to tease out some of those questions that you're asking in part of that information. It relates to this, but it's different. And so that's why it's in that slide deck and not this one.
I understand. I just want to make one quick point.
Yeah.
And point being is it's not about blame. It's about what's been done in the past. And it's about in 2006, the leadership then didn't think, oh, in 15 years, this is not going to be X amount of years old. You know, that was part of their evaluation. It's always been part of the evaluation.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone have any last thoughts? Because if not, I'm super excited for you to talk about meters next. Catherine's like, yay, more nerd stuff. Cool. All right. So this was, just go back to that slide real quick, Julie. So we're tracking levers. I picked up a couple more in your conversation today, assumptions and levers that we'll just have as an ongoing conversation, so that when we get back to it in December, we're really like, what do you want to do? We have a comprehensive list of sort of policy buttons that y'all can push and dials you can turn. So you'll start to see this kind of slide get populated as we go along, and more of them cute little stars, because those are some of the things that you can fiddle with as you think about the future. Julie, you've been a joy. You're off the hook, friend. Hey, Stephen, you're in the presentation seat, sir. Let's see your shining face, darling. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Fantastic. Would you tell us ever so briefly who you are and why we're taking your thoughts on this, and then tell us about meters, if you would.
Yeah, my name is Stephen Gay. I'm the Utilities Operations Manager for the City of Westminster. I work in the Public Works and Utilities Department. I'd like to thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members for giving me this opportunity to have a conversation with you tonight regarding our meters and our metering systems. To tee up the discussion, I'm going to start with a high-level review of where we were, where we are now, and where we're going with regards to our meters and the associated meter reading system. Along the way, I hope to answer some questions regarding why we're changing the meter system out, how we identified a replacement system, where we are with regards to the system replacement, and why are we confident in the accuracy of the meters that we're installing today. So, and that's just to name a few. So if you guys are ready to get started, I am. Julie, if you could take us to the first slide. In 2006, 2007, we replaced our small meter system. In 2016, that system reached the end of its useful life. In 2016 to 2018, we conducted pilot testing to identify viable replacement technologies. In 2018 to 2019, we competitively bid this project. In June of 2019, Council approved our recommended solution to replace the small meters. And in January of 2020, we started actually putting new meters into the ground. Now, there was some work that was done between June of 2019 and January of 2020, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the slide presentation. We expect by February of 2021 to be complete with the meter replacement project. And then looking forward, in July of 2021, we're hoping to launch a customer portal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And then after that phase, the customer portal is launched, we hope to be able to evaluate our billing cycle and potentially make some adjustments to that. So Julie, next slide, please. There we go. So why change the meters? Well, the short answer is the system had exceeded its useful life and was failing. It's these failures that triggered our evaluation of a replacement metering system in 2016. And it's important to note that when we talk about meters, we're actually talking about, the meters are part of a larger system. So when we talk about replacing the meters, we're actually talking about replacing the metering system. Most meters systems consist of, a meter, batteries, radios, or some type of a communications device, and related software. And referencing our existing meter system, the meters themselves were the most mechanical component within that system. And as these systems age, as you know, and I heard the conversation, you understand, parts stop moving or malfunction, batteries die, radios fail. This is what triggered our evaluation in 2016, a significant number of failures throughout the entire system. And the software was no longer even supported by the manufacturer. So essentially, it was becoming more and more expensive for us to keep fixing the system, and it was time to replace it. Next slide, please. Awkward pause.
I have the new slide. Do you have it?
There we go. All right, so now that we've decided that the existing system needed to be replaced, what do we replace it with, right? So the utilities operations team, specifically our meter shop, conducted pilot testing to evaluate meter systems. Now the team identified 5 manufacturers based off of their industry experience and market availability. And from 2016 to 2018, this team pilot tested all 5 of these systems, installing meters on residential and commercial services. All pilot meters were tested for accuracy prior to installation in the field. The meters were installed again in residential and commercial services. And the distribution of the pilot meters varied based off of topography and communication considerations. We really wanted to evaluate the meter system's performance in some of our more challenging areas. We also wanted to evaluate the quality of materials and the ease of installation. So we spread the installations out throughout the entire distribution system. You know, as you can imagine, some of our older parts of town were more mature and came with some unique challenges with regards to installations. And the newer parts of the system, well, they were more modern and they had less challenges associated with those installations. This gave the team a sense of how durable the components or the meters and materials were and how difficult some installations might be. We tested these meter systems in the field for 6 to 8 months to evaluate their performance. The data that was acquired from the pilot testing informed the system specifications that was folded into our request for proposal. Now, this data clarified for the meter team the must-haves for the new system. It must be accurate. It must be reliable, well-constructed, have reasonable operation and maintenance costs associated with it, and provide our end users with tools that they could use to monitor and manage their own water use. So the project was competitively bid in February of 2019. The 5 meter companies that participated in the pilot were invited to bid on the project. 2 of them responded, and 1 of them was disqualified for failure to meet our specifications of the RFP. However, since this was an RFP, the team did evaluate their proposal fully, and this evaluation identified that the proposal included an additional operations and maintenance costs and ongoing cost for the communications component of the metering system. In essence, it would lock us into a 20-year agreement for cellular data equal to $350,000 a year for the first year, with incremental increases built in for subsequent years. So the selected meter solution did not have the same ongoing O&M costs. And this is an example of one of the variables when we did the evaluation. Now, as a result of the bidding process, in our evaluation, UMS, that's Utility Metering Services, was selected to install the census metering system. Next slide, please. So what is the status of the meter replacement project? Remember on that first slide, I said that there was some work done between council approval and actually putting the meters in the ground in January of 2020. We actually stood up a fixed network to communicate with the meters that are being installed today. And we tested that network to ensure its reliability and connectivity throughout our system. And then we began installing the meters in January of 2020. As of October, so that's yesterday, we have replaced 27,568 meters. We expect to complete the meter installation project by February of 2020, and that's going to be 31,500 meters. However, given our current pace, it's likely that we'll be completed with the project before the end of 2020. Again, the focus is on small meters, predominantly residential. And these meters were installed, and so our strategy for installing the meters was based off of billing cycle. So we wanted to wait until a cycle had finished billing, and then the team would come in afterward to install the new meters. And this was done to minimize the disruption and confusion for our customers. And again, as you can see, the customer portal coming in 2021. So next slide, please. So what should you know about the meters? Well, There's a lot of features in the new metering system, but one of the most valuable we're seeing is that it stores hourly read data, where our old metering system didn't. So essentially with the old metering system, what we would do is we'd have a metering technician drive a route. So they drive down the street and the equipment in their vehicle would send out a signal to the meters in the area and say, hey, wake up, tell me what your meter reading is right now at this time. And we would take the old meter reading and the new meter reading, and the difference between the two of them was the consumption. Well, the new meter reading system actually captures and stores hourly consumption data. And now this is important, as it allows the customer the ability to identify when consumption actually occurred and how much water was used during that period of time. So for example, my teenager, which I don't have any teenagers anymore, they're all grown and gone and, you know, around the world actually right now. But say they take a shower every evening after dinner for 45 minutes. Well, that shower just used X amount of gallons of water. The customers will be able to see that data dynamically. And then they can use that to help them optimize their water use if they choose to. So they can say, hey, you don't want to cut in your shower down from 45 minutes to 30 minutes. You only need that much time to get clean, right? The new meter system also allows for the review of past consumption, right? So it helps the customer identify when their consumption patterns. Here again, they can use this information to make decisions regarding the way they choose to use water. For example, my sprinkler systems run 3 times a day for 50 minutes, 7 days a week. Each time I run that system, I use 450 gallons of water. Based off of this information, the customer may choose to reduce the frequency or the duration of irrigation in an effort to optimize their water use. It's a tool for them. The new meter system will provide leak alerts within 24 hours once our portal is active. Currently, we notify customers between 30 and 90 days after a leak is detected on the current, and that's 30 to 90 days after a leak is detected, and that's based off of the current system, the way the current system operates, and the utility billing workload. The meters are more sensitive technology that identifies small leaks. This metering system has an expected useful life of 20 years versus the 10 years of the system that we're replacing. It allows for firmware updates to be pushed out remotely. So through that fixed network that I talked about, we can literally push out those updates to the meters and the software remotely, where in the past, historically, we would have to drive the routes. So we'd have to put an individual in a vehicle and you'd have to drive through the neighborhoods, updating all the meters along the way. And it also allows for remote reading. So the way, as I said, the way that we read the meters now, somebody gets in a vehicle and they drive a route and that's how they read the meters. We no longer have to do that with the new metering system. So currently it takes us 80 personnel hours every month to read our meter routes, right? With the new system, because it is a remote read, it's literally a click of a button and we can download those reads within that route. In addition, when we activate or discontinue a service, we have to send a technician out to that site to capture the either final read or the startup read and report that over to utility billing. Yes, sir, Mr. DeMont? Councilor DeMont?
With the ability to do that so much easier, because I've heard in the past when we talk about the different billing cycles that I thought that was a driver about the billing cycles because of the complexity of going out and driving and picking up meter reads. Do these new meters allow us to regularize I don't know if that's the right word or even a word at all, make a more standard billing cycle so that everybody has, say, a 30-day billing cycle or whatever?
That's our hope. When we're done deploying the meter system and the customer portal, that is absolutely what we'll be evaluating if we're able to normalize that frequency.
All right, great, thank you.
You're welcome, sir. So there's no driving to get those final reads or those new reads. And it's huge savings in time. So the next slide, please. So what's the long-term plan, right? Well, you heard me talk about the portal. Well, this portal is focused on providing our customers with tools they can use to optimize their water use. Provides them a tool that they can customize leak and high use notifications. They can look on demand, they can access their hourly use data and say, hey, you know what, my sprinklers ran last night. I want to see for each zone that came on, I can look to see what's going on with that actual consumption. They'll have access to historical bill and bill use and comparison. And one of the most exciting features that I feel that it provides, the portal will provide, is the ability for the end user to set their own water budget, if, you know, for lack of a better term. They could look into their, you know, they could look at their situation and say, hey, you know what, I only want to spend $50 a month on my water bill, whatever the number is. The system is intelligent enough, and through the portal will be able to track their consumption throughout the month and send them notifications. Hey, you're at you know, half of the 15th of the month, you're doing great. You're only at 25% consumption of 25% of the budget that you set for yourself. So I think this is a huge tool, or could be a huge tool for the customers that may want to leverage it. And again, back to your comment, Councilor DeMott, is we do believe it will provide us the ability to support a change in the billing cycle length. Next slide, please. All right, here's a question. Are we aware of the legal troubles with Census? Yes, we are. We are aware that Census had issues regarding accuracy prior to 2017. We are also aware that Census identified the issue and resolved it. It was related to a manufacturing process and the use of a new material in the flow tube of the meters. We are also and Census they reverted back to the original process and the material for this component of the meters. And since then, well, they've resolved the issue. We have no data, or we're not aware of any product issues since they've made that correction. And I think it's also important to point out, and I'll touch on this on the next slide as well, but it's important to understand that all the meters that we're installing in our system today are tested to a American Water Works Association standard for accuracy. And that standard was published in 2018. So everything that we're installing in the system today is tested for accuracy to that 2018 standard. So speaking of accuracy, next slide, please. So how do we know the meters are accurate? Well, we essentially have 5 data points that give us a high level of confidence that the meters are accurate. The first of which I mentioned in the last slide, and that is that we know that Census modified their processes to correct the previous accuracy issues, and that the meters we are installing as part of this project are tested to a 2018 AWWA accuracy standard. That's AWWA is the American Water Works Association. Additionally, the manufacturer self-certifies that they are compliant with the national standards for health and safety. They also self-certify that they are compliant with the American Water Works Association standard for accuracy, and that their meters are tested using an American Water Works Association standard for testing. They self-certify all of this information, but beyond that, the manufacturer sends batch samples of the meters to a third-party independent laboratory. This laboratory verifies the compliance with these standards. So they test them using the same AWWA testing methodology. They compare the results to the same AWWA standard for accuracy, and then they certify that accuracy, and they provide that credential to us as the end user. In addition to that, we, the city of Westminster, actually conduct the same accuracy testing. We do batch samples of all the new meters that are provided to us as part of this project. So we put the meters on the bench. We use the same AWWA testing methodology. We compare those results to the same AWWA standard for accuracy. And in our testing of our bench testing, we have realized 100% accuracy or compliance with the AWWA standards. And lastly, when a customer has a concern with regards to the potential accuracy of their meter, we send the metering technician out there. We offer to bring the meter into the shop. We offer for the customer to accompany us and observe the test on our bench. And we follow, again, the AWWA standard for testing methodology and compare those results to the AWWA standards. And just so you know, all three, both the manufacturer, the independent testing lab, and the city of Westminster all use a gravimetric automated water meter test bench. Our bench is state certified and calibrated annually by an independent contractor. So these factors are what give us that high level of confidence that the meters that we have purchased and are installing are accurate. They meet the AWWA standard. So next slide, please. So what are my meters accurate and I still have concerns? Well, we have a plan for that. We've had customers express concerns about their new meters. When we receive these concerns, we investigate. Admittedly, during a handful of these investigations, and I would say 5 or less, we have found that the new meter was improperly installed, resulting in a leak on the customer side. Well, in these cases, we work with our utility billing to ensure the account is properly credited, so there's no impact to the customer. But when proper installation isn't the cause of the customer's concern, what do, right? Well, especially with this new meter technology, we can walk through the customer's hourly consumption history to help them identify the cause of any increased use. The hourly consumption profile helps us identify the cause, and the most common findings are leaky toilets, sprinkler system settings, and indoor leaks. And believe it or not, the data will actually, when you look at the profile, you can really tell when you drill down whether it is a toilet leak or a slow leak or a sprinkler system. Now, depending on what this analysis reveals, we then direct or lead our customers to some resources that we have available. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the sprinkler audit that Public Works and Utilities purchases a number of these audits every year and make them available at no cost to the customers. And they have an independent contractor that comes out to the customer's home, and they set up these little cups all through the lawn, and they look at the sprinkler system and the timing and the amount of times that the system's running. Then they run it to make sure that they're getting an adequate coverage for their specific need, and make adjustments. And that is a service that we provide to the customer at no cost. And I believe that there's a new program, I don't know much about it. It is the indoor leak investigation program that we are moving forward with. And I know Chris is maybe a panelist on this, and she might, or Max may chime in on it, but I believe it's a similar structure. We'll be purchasing a number of these audits or these investigations in advance and making those available to customers at no additional cost in the future. So next slide, please. So I'm an operations guy. I run and maintain our distribution and collection and treatment systems. So this is about how the water is built, and I'm going to do my very best to walk you through this. But if I mess up, I know somebody. So let's have the first one here. So in a given month, the first month, say the customer uses 6,251 gallons of water. Now, it's important to remember, we only bill per 1,000 gallons used. That's all we do. We bill per 1,000 gallons that are used. So in this case, what are we going to bill the customer? We're going to bill the customer for, okay, next button, for 6,000 gallons of use. So what do we do with that 250 gallons? We take that 250 gallons and we carry it forward to the next billing cycle. So say in that case, the customer uses 6,722 gallons of water. We add the 251 gallons to that, coming up with a grand total of 6,978 gallons. Any guess on what we're going to charge the customer, what we're going to bill them for? 6,000 gallons. So we take the 978 gallons that's left over and we carry that forward to the next billing cycle. So say in this cycle, the customer uses 5,050 gallons of water. We add the 978 gallons to the 5,050 gallons to come up with a total of 6,028 gallons of water, and we bill the customer for 6,000 gallons. So that's how the water use is metered and billed. And with that, I believe I've ended my presentation and will make myself available to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Real quickly, Stephen, two things. One is on that last slide, the reason that we care about that is one of the questions you're hearing about the meters is how can the meter be accurate if I'm always getting billed for the same amount of water? And that's why we laid that out, right? Because to explain why there's a reason there, okay?
Yep.
Second thing is you're participating in informal council discussion night, and so we're calling people by their first names. So get on board. All right.
Old habits die hard, and they don't let me out very often, and this is why.
This is why. Okay, well, try harder. All right, council. This was information that you all requested based on some feedback that you're getting from your constituents. What questions or comments do you have, Herb?
Yeah, this is more a comment, and this is going back to a piece where Stephen was talking about. The difference between the previous meter and these meters is they're mechanically manufactured out of basically the same materials.
Mm-hmm.
We had an inquiry that indicated that because the meter was changed out to the new meter, that the customer received a grounding problem at their home. The meter is not the grounding issue. Between the meter pit and a person's home, there's a pipe that's buried in the ground, directly exposed to the earth, out of copper. That is a grounding method under the state electrical law. Having had a master electrician's license, I know where I can go to for a ground. Now, if a ground for the copper line is not near to the electrical service, then the electrician is required to drag an 8-foot ground rod in next to the electrical service and attach to that for the grounding service for the home. So the meters have nothing to do with the house electrical system being grounded. That is also true that if you have an overhead electrical service, whether it's underground into your home or overhead, the grounding requirements for the electrician are the same.
Excellent, thank you. Anita, question, comment?
I have a question, kind of similar to Councilor DeMont. I've heard stories of people the very first month that they have the meters, that they have a real spiky bill where it jumps up, and then after that it seems pretty normal. And recently I forwarded on a question like this from a woman who I have known for years and years. Like, she's taught my child Sunday school. I know her to be very calm, level-headed. And when we forwarded on her bill, and it was in the month that her meter was installed, they were able to tell, because of these new meters, that the extreme usage didn't happen after the new meter, but happened sometime prior. So this is a question I don't expect you to have an answer, but I'd like us to look into. Is there anything that could occur in the installation process that could make the previous meters read a much higher usage than is actual? Just because I've heard it a few times. Our own city utility department looked at our bill and was like, yeah, that was really unusual use for you. and actually once you got the new meter, your water use went down. It just feels funny, and I feel like I've heard it enough times that I'd like to figure out if it's just that's where it was. Maybe she left her garden hose on, the night before the new meter came on. I just would like to understand how that could happen, and maybe it is an answer just like that there's no possible way and process it could go up. But I guess I just want to let you know that there is that curiosity in the community and kind of prevalent concern that there's something going on with the installation process.
Well, you're right. I couldn't provide you an answer this evening, but I can look into it. And I just want to make sure I got your question right, Anita.
I can offline share with you her name, but I know there's been other people like that who have emailed in their bills.
Okay, if you could provide that, we'll definitely look into it and see if we can get you an answer.
I'll email you just now.
Okay, thank you.
Dave, the folks that you've heard from, similar thing where it was a spike in the month that it was installed, or you have a different set of sort of experiences from the
I think all of us have heard that, but I actually have another question spurred off of Anita's question. This is just more of a curiosity. So maybe as you work on her question and getting us some information on that, I'm just curious, with all the testing and everything, obviously any kind of meter has a certain pressure limitation. So, as Anita was talking about the question that she just had for you, I was thinking about, and this is a different kind of meter, but I remember hearing the whole story of the house that blew up in the city because of basically, if I remember right, there was something faulty with the meter or the gas into a home that caused the pressure caused it to fail. So along that lines, and I don't know if this is true or not, I'm just curious, as we're adding all these meters throughout the city, is there fluctuation in pressure in our system, or just in general fluctuation in pressure in the system? How do these meters, I'm sure all these meters have some way of they compensate for that. Is there like a pretty wide range that they can tolerate as far as how they operate? And this is just more of a curiosity off of kind of what Anita's saying and thinking through. Obviously you've been attaching these new meters, this has been going on throughout the city. I remember when they did mine, it was in the midst of everything really being bad in the beginning of April, but they just went down the street. I'd see them one after another, just kind of going through them. So do you have any information on that, or is that something you could follow up with us?
I can give you a brief answer. So fundamentally, the pressures are maintained within the distribution through pressure regulating valves, and those are control valves that monitor the upstream pressure and then kind of reduce it or increase it for downstream pressure. The example that you're giving about the home that had concerns with the water pressure was due to a failed pressure regulating valve in the system, which what happens is when they fail, they actually open up all the way. So all the pressure had moved from the upstream side to the downstream side, causing some issues on the customer's service. It had nothing to do with the water meter. It was actually a control valve that are strategically placed throughout the distribution system. The other example you mentioned was, I believe it was due to a faulty gas meter, and that was the home that blew up, I believe, over by City Hall some years ago. And I believe that was the cause of that. So with regards to the water meter construction, you're absolutely right. They have a very wide range of operation, but they're not really, the pressure has little to no effect on them and has little to no impact on the downstream user.
That's good to know. That totally answers my question, because I just, I don't know enough about them to know if we had fluctuations in pressure, if it would really affect them. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Other
Okay.
council questions for Stephen? Yeah, Rich.
Just a takeaway from this part too, and this, let's let you know my ignorance on this. I didn't realize that we rolled over the balance to round numbers, because that gives me some concern why we don't use an incremental billing system when we have a tier system. It could it could possibly bump people at the wrong time to the next tier because of a carryover. And if we're now sophisticated enough to get those exact readings, can we use incremental billing and charge people for what they use every month?
So part of that is I assume a conversation we can have as part of the policy discussion, how that relates to rates. I guess I'm just double checking with you, Stephen, that because the meters do measure at that finer scale, the meter reading detail is not a barrier to incremental billing. It's different stuff that we can talk about. Is that right?
Yeah, that would absolutely be a policy decision on how you wanted to bill consumption, whether it be per gallon or per 1,000 gallons. We have historically, which means nothing because we can always change, have billed per 1,000 gallons of use.
So Rich, you have identified another lever that we'll put on our lever sheet of things for you all to consider when you want to talk about ways to change, if you want to change going forward, for sure. Other questions, comments, takeaways? I did ask staff to go through all the public comment through the website and just pull out all the meter questions to make sure we tackled all of the ones that were there. So, and I think this addressed those. Have any of you heard any other questions that somehow weren't addressed about meters that weren't addressed here? Yep, Dave, and then Lindsay.
I'm just curious on the leak program. Is that available? And I think we talked about this, so I just want to clarify my remembering. Is that available to any resident, or is it only available to like a certain income qualified resident? Is there, who's that program available to?
Don't quote me on this. I will verify my answer, but I do believe it's very similar to our irrigation program, and that it's available to any resident that requests. It's not based off of revenue, income, or financial situation. It's you're a resident, you have a concern, you'd like an investigation. We prepay for a number of these every year, and I can verify that and get back to you, Councilor or David.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Chris Gray texted me and said, yes, it's available to all residents.
There you go.
Yeah, multitasking here from all the staff. Lindsay, quick question.
Yes, and I don't know if it falls into the meter question. And and forgive me if you touched on it, is the cycle of which we charge residents, because I know that some people have had concerns about a 33-day cycle, and some of the answer involved the meters and how we read them. So I didn't know if that was appropriate to ask here versus into another discussion.
So Stephen, you correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is the technical barrier that was driving the meter, the billing cycle previously, goes away with these new meters. So part of the council conversation on policy can be to forward-looking, regularize, see, Dave, totally a word, regularize the billing cycle. But it sounds like we need to wait until that customer portal thing is up and ready to go. Is that right, Stephen?
I think that the prudent approach would be to wait until the system is fully integrated and the customer portal is launched. And then we can collect some data and we can evaluate our ability to modify that cycle. We strongly believe that will be possible, but I don't want to commit to anything at this point until we get everything kind of installed and the customer portal going, and we verify that with our billing staff and things as well. Is that a fair answer, Councilor Lindsay?
Yes.
He's getting better. He got you to Councilor Lindsay, so we're making progress. And just to Councilor Lindsay's question, though, Stephen, that the portal you expect to be ready sort of May, June-ish, and that's about the time that council can start to think about that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So in the near term, but not right this very minute.
Correct.
Okay. So council, I'm mindful that it's 8 o'clock. I wanted to talk to you for a quick minute about community engagement. Can you hang with us for a little longer?
Am I good?
Yeah, you're good.
Have I
Thank you.
been excused? Thank you,
You
everyone.
can
Have a
come back
wonderful evening. And thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Cool. Council, can you give us a few more minutes to talk about community engagement? I see nodding. Thank you. More nodding. Nodding is good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate the visual. So next question or slide, if you would, Julie. Just a quick thing. We've been tracking related to community engagement. If you remember on our last workshop, we said if residents have questions and we can get any of those questions addressed through these, we'd be delighted to do that. And so some of those have come through the website, and I just want to do full disclosure of what we've heard and whether or not we think we're answering them. So one, we saw one about, will there be a rate increase in 2022 to reflect, or a rate change maybe in 2022 to reflect the revenues from 2021? And that's any rate changes, right? That's part of your policy conversation that you can start in December and figure out what you want to do going forward. So that's a TBD, but we're tracking it for you to consider. We got the question about, are the new meters causing spikes in usage? I think to the best of our ability, folks have answered that one tonight. Heard what was the 2019 actual revenue versus the 2019 budget projection, and what's the projection for 2020? That's part of that juicy cost, how we calculate costs, things that will be in your next conversation on the 5th. Someone suggested that maybe staff should provide annual actual revenues and compare them to their budget projections on a regular basis for council to consider if you wanted to change rates in response to actual versus projected. And staff provides this information as part of your annual budget conversations, and then you get those monthly financial updates. So this one, as a reporting from staff to you, seems to be already in the system. Again, whether or not you wanted to roll that into policy changes on rates, that's for you to consider in December. Does council want to consider changing rates in response to the revenues that were received above the budgets? Again, that's part of that, your call to have that conversation in December. Are ratepayers charged for repairs when contractors damage their pipes? And no, all the ratepayers don't pay if my contractor damages my pipes, but rather either the homeowner or the contractor is required to pay for those. And then, and Rich, this sort of gets to something that you've alluded to on equity. Why are current customers bearing the brunt of paying for all these current and future infrastructure projects? And so that is part of that rate consideration and how staff thinks about infrastructure and maintenance going forward. So you'll have information about it on the 5th, and then what you all as council want to suggest that staff do about it, or get some community feedback on some ideas, that would be part of your conversation in December and January. So we're keeping an eye on these. If you're getting things, continue to send them to us. Community members who are watching, of which there are, it looks like a good bunch, would really encourage you to keep sending these questions in through the website or through your members of council, because that's super helpful for us to know what's on everybody's mind. Yeah, Anita?
This is Anita. I think that one question, are ratepayers charged for repairs when contractors damage pipes? I think you talked about it like at the residential level, but my guess is they're probably meaning about like large developments. And so I think the answer still holds true, whether it's Comcast or a massive developer, they're accountable for fixing the system, correct?
That's my understanding. Julie will pipe in and tell us if we're wrong. Okay, so next slide, Julie. Okay, so when last we were together, we asked you, here are some options for ways to think about community engagement. You gave us some feedback, and I said we would think about it some more and come back to you with some more refined thoughts. Next slide. So we went through and looked at the overall schedule. I heard what you all said, and I just wanted to start with some general principles of community engagement that we think about. The first one is we ask for input on things that matter to people. We ask for input in ways that can influence the outcome. Anita, this was part of what you were saying last time of if it's not going to influence, then we're not going to ask them. The third one is we ask for input in ways and places that are accessible and convenient to people so that it's not hard for them to engage. We try to minimize the barriers to engagement. And the fourth one is we ask for input at a time when it can be used to influence the outcome. So timing does matter. For me personally, my number one rule, and I give this advice to all the people, is just fundamentally don't ask if you don't care. If we're going to ask the question, it means we care about your answers, and your answers are going to be used to consider a policy option. You're not guaranteeing that you're going to make the change that people want, but you have to ask questions where you're open to incorporating that feedback into the things. So for example, I'm going to give you some ideas about what we want to talk to the community about. And one of them is not whether or not people want safe water. Because we're going to give them safe water, right? We talked about the regulations. That's just a thing. So that's the kind of question we wouldn't ask, because even if someone says, you know what, I'm okay if you kind of lower the quality of my water because that would make my water cheaper, that's not the question that we're going to ask. We ask questions that can actually influence things because, we ask questions when we care. Next slide. So based on those thoughts, what we've thought about is, and Lindsay, we had a sort of an email exchange about this. There's kind of 2 rounds of a community engagement in what we've talked about. The first round starts sort of now-ish, and now through sort of December, right? And this is when we talked about doing that front-loaded, front-end engagement on community values and preferences, where we can ask them about infrastructure costs and rates and trade-offs and other kinds of things that have been part of your conversation tonight, those equity questions, the how would you balance the trade-offs kind of stuff. We ask them that now to inform your council conversation later on about, what kind of ideas do you have for ways to balance those? So we get input from them to inform your discussion. Then sort of December, January-ish, you all come up with some cool ideas. This might be 1 idea, it might be 3 ideas, it might be 2, it might be 4, I don't really know. But you'll have ideas of ways that we could, different ways that we could balance the trade-offs. And then we would want to go back to the community and say, here are some ideas. What do you think about these ideas? So it's the 2 rounds, and that second round is about getting community input on 1 or more options from your conversations, and then you would use whatever their feedback is to sort of refine that down to 1 option for the future. So 2 rounds, roughly November, December, concurrent to your conversations here. We would be going out to the community to get their feedback on these higher level things, and then when you're ready to talk about ideas, you would have that information to inform your ideas. Next slide. So I was trying to brainstorm, and I thought a lot about your conversation last time about what are the kinds of questions that we can ask the community. Some of them are similar to the levers that you all can pull as part of your policy conversation. We can ask them, what are their level of service expectations? We can ask them questions about their level of concern about long-term needs and future infrastructure and how they think about that. We can ask them about what they think is the right allocation of resources to current and future infrastructures, how they would balance kind of that equity piece. We could ask them, if you're concerned about the future, but high rates or current rate structure is not for you, what other ideas or options, do we want to kick around? Maybe community people are real smart. Maybe they have some sweet ideas. We could ask them something about their level of concern about their rates and their current bills. Maybe I suspect there's a range of opinions in your community. It's a nice broad diversity of humanity. But mostly why does that concern them? Do you have those people, a lot of those people who are not, making hard trade-offs in their personal expenditures, et cetera. We could ask them about their preferences and options for having people who use more water pay more or not pay more. So if that conservation pricing, that's part of that tier structure, we could ask people if they think that's a good idea or a terrible idea or somewhere in between. We could ask them what kind of considerations they think should be included or not included in rates, conservation, future planning, what have you. And we could ask them sort of prioritization value questions about low bills now versus future planning and how do you balance those things. These are all just ideas that would give you a sense of how the community weighs these kinds of things. And then you might come up with different packages of ideas that weigh them differently based on what you've heard. Next slide. So then that would happen. And then you have this interlude sort of December, January-ish. Timing is TBD depending on how long it takes you to come up with what your ideas are. That's why we're saying January, just to be on the outside. So you'll develop 1 or more options. They'll be based on all the things that you've learned from staff and from your conversations with each other. They'll be informed by those community preference and values that we'll get from the engagement. Again, it might be 1 option, it might be more than 1 option, and a single, what we're calling an option, could be a package of ideas. It could be, this kind of a rate structure with this kind of a planning for the future, with this kind of a thing and that kind of thing, with where you've toggled the pieces differently in different options. That's why you might have multiple options, because you have so many levers that we've identified that you can play with that might help you get to multiple options to run by the community and see what they think. Next slide. So then you'd have options, and then we would take those options out, one or more options out to the community and say, so here's that list of interests that council was trying to balance with these ideas. Here's what the one or more ideas are. And for those ideas, we would ask the community, what do you like? What concerns do you have? What changes would you want to recommend to make each option better? And community members are so awesome at this kind of feedback. They're so thoughtful. And then we would also invite additional ideas. What interests or values are not fully addressed here, or what additional suggestions or ideas do you have? And again, yard that all up and bring it back to you. So that's that second window of engagement. Next slide. So the question then becomes, wow, that sounds maybe super interesting, but what are the methods? And the methods become a much harder conversation now because of COVID, like we talked about last time, than perhaps we had hoped. So thing one, we talked about putting survey questions online in both Spanish and English. You post it on the website, you notice it in the utility bills. We would also notice it in press releases and the weekly email that staff sends out in social media and all the things. So for some group of humans, that will be a great place for them to provide input and find information. Additionally, we thought we could do some of those virtual focus groups we talked about last time, where we would use the same kinds of questions from the survey, but dig in a little bit more to the why and what are you thinking, and do more of a discussion, do it with residents and the business community, maybe target some specific groups, English and Spanish. I've learned that you have the capacity on staff to do some of these in Spanish, which I think is great. We would want to have a reservation requirement just so we didn't get 8,000 people in one focus group, because that wouldn't be very focusy. The thinking is sort of 10-ish people per group, doing at least 5 and more if time and interest is there. And then we would really love it if, once we get those set up, if one member of council would attend each one, just so you can do some of that hearing and learning of what comes out of those focus groups yourselves. But this isn't enough, in part because of what we talked about last time, is not everybody does the virtual thing. And so next slide. In person gets really hard. So often, you know, in these things, we have people stand outside the grocery store. That's just not feeling safe and really uncomfortable. I've learned that you have done in the past a telephone poll through a contractor that does statistically verifiable telephone surveys. More people have telephones than have computers, internet, and all the things. So the hope is this might equalize a little bit of the demographic representation by doing the telephone model. They can do it, the telephone polling, in Spanish and English. And again, we would hope that we would get an increased likelihood of a representative sample of your community. I'm going to come back to this here in a minute, but go on next slide, Julie. Some additional things to consider. Again, COVID permitting, I would love to do in-person focus groups. I'd love to have you have staff get actual people together and actually have a conversation like we used to do in the old timey days. And those could be place-based or group-based, you know, this part of the city or this specific demographic. And that would make it easier to target underserved communities for that kind of engagement. Again, doing it in English and Spanish. The COVID outlook does not look great for this, but it still is a thing that we could consider if things change. And then some really targeted outreach to those underserved communities. Growing Home is a partner with the city and has some relationships there. And there are other organizations that my understanding is the city works with that you could leverage for that. And then part of the conversation isn't just, hey, tell the people to engage with us, but rather, hey, Growing Home, this is a community you work with. What additional methods would you recommend for engaging these folks? And then staff would proceed based on whatever those recommendations are. Next slide. Hey, that was the last slide. So here's the thing. This ends up being a really, really critical component of your conversation. And if we want to do these things, we kind of need to get after it right now. But the other thing is, given the range of perspectives on council and the range of perspectives in the community, I would hope that maybe a couple of you would be willing to sit down with staff and maybe if there's going to be a telephone polling contractor, sit down with them to help frame up the questions so that we're sure that whatever comes out of this, you as council have confidence that it's balanced, that it represents the questions that you all have. Because I just made up what was on that slide. You probably have smarter and different and better ideas, and we should, you know, use yours and not mine. So the primary questions for you tonight are, overall, does that sound like a plan? And if not, what would you like us to do instead? And are there a couple of you that would be willing to sit down with staff and think through the specific details of it, so that whatever happened gave you confidence? What are your thoughts? Yeah, Dave.
I'm just curious on this. Like I like as many data points as possible so that we make sure that we're getting the different parts of the city. And we have a very large, diverse city.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the statistically valid survey, I'd be curious the results of the phone ones we've done versus like when we do the citizen survey where they actually send out postcards. So I don't know if that's something we've contemplated or what the cost would be for this. But I mean, if, I'd be curious the difference between those two things.
Okay.
So maybe that's some feedback from staff that we could gather.
Yep, we can probably get you some information about that. And if separate from the cost, if it was cost permitting, would you want to do both of the things, this telephone survey and postcards, Dave, or would you think pick whichever one gets you the best representative sample and the most response?
I'd be open to it. I think it would be interesting to be able to measure those against each other as well as measure them against the feedback that we get from our other data points. I think that one of the, I don't want to call it an issue because I am super glad that all the people who are diehard local government nerds like the 7 of us show up to all our meetings. However, we do get kind of the rank and file people, and although we do want to hear from those people, we want to make sure that we're hearing from the people that are engaged in this and are affected by this, that maybe don't nerd out as much as we do on local government.
Lucky ducks that they might be.
Yeah.
Other perspectives, council? Yeah, Rich.
As far as the survey too, and I agree with Dave that, it'd be nice to see that balance between those two sides. We all know about telephone surveys and the lack of landlines now and how that weights that. But I'm also concerned is how we can weight the surveys. Honestly, if we survey a population that is primarily year-round indoor users, they have a different perspective than those people who are at tier 2 and then at tier 3. So there's got to be some consideration of weighting that way. And that's, the postcards can balance that, and then, the phone side can that. So that we can see those spectrums and then break that data down inside those.
Fantastic. Yep, I think that's right. I think the other thing you could do to get at that is there's maybe some demographic questions you could ask at the beginning to sort, so you could know what kind of water user it was. But I think maybe doing all those things would give you the most reliable data. Anita, what do you think? Oh, mute. Mute.
Yeah, I'm not worried about if we utilize a firm that knows how to do statistically valid surveys, that they'll figure out a way to do it, and particularly wanting to make sure that we have the different types of water tiers is, I think, important to note, but I'm sure they'll figure it out. What I do have a little bit of concern with is, ideally we would figure out like where are the guardrails and what we're asking the residents as a body after we've had these presentations. And so I'm a little uncomfortable with you deciding what the guardrails are on those, because you brought up one thing like, hey, we're not going to even bring up safe water because obviously we'll do that, but maybe we'll bring up future planning. And I would say to not consider future planning in our water plan, like that's equally irresponsible and would put, so I guess I'm a little uncomfortable that our body here, that I don't see Rich's voice or John's voice or my voice in how we make those constraints. And I would hate to think, but I think it might be possible that if there was 2 or 3 of us working with staff on this, that might not give the confidence to the whole body. And I think for this exercise to be worthwhile, this whole body has to agree to at least like how we're doing community outreach. And so I guess I'm trying to think about it. And then if I was going into a mechanic to get something fixed, I don't know if I'd ask all my neighbors like, hey, like I feel like I'd want to get the estimate from the mechanic, understand what are my 3 options, and then like talk with my husband, how are we going to get this fixed? Which one should we go with? I'm just a little nervous. I'm not sure. I really want, if we're asking people to spend their time filling out a survey or doing the survey on the phone, every single thing we ask them has to be relevant and actionable. Like we can't, I really don't want to take people's information and do nothing with it. Like everything we ascertain from that has to be able to impact our policy decisions. And so that was why I had kind of felt more comfortable with that one where we come up with kind of the 3 options and then communicate that and get an idea on the qualitative, because I felt more comfortable. I'm happy to do this one, but I really want to be respectful of people's time and input. And I think, I do believe every member on this council feels that duty of care and wouldn't want to have conversations which are like, no more rate increases ever, regardless of the consequences. Like I don't think any of us would be willing to like jeopardize our infrastructure. And so I do want to make sure we're careful on the guardrails.
Mm-hmm. So I think the question on that, I mean, if it makes more sense for all of you to be a part of that conversation, if you're going to, so my advice would be, if you're going to use the telephone poll or to do the statistically valid thing, that's where you start, and how that person with their expertise helps frame the questions. Those become the questions that go into the other avenues of engagement. And so if you like those ideas, then I think, and you all would want to be a part of that, then there's an additional conversation that we would want to add where that person, expertise human, comes and chats with all of you, which might be an additional meeting. And again, I defer to your time and what your preference is. But that's why I was thinking if there was a representative sample of you all that could sit down offline, that might be more efficient. But I certainly see your point, is there's a bunch of different views on this group of humans. So I get that.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to volunteer my colleagues for another meeting, but I would want them all to feel comfortable. Like I would be worried if I was the one who volunteered to help staff that there might be some concern on some of their, you know what I mean? I just want everyone to feel like it's their process.
Mm-hmm. What do others think? Yeah, Lindsay?
I think this is, it's, and you're right, we did have a email exchange because I couldn't quite put my finger on how this was different than what was proposed in March, in April-ish, for going out to the public to explain rates and explain how we got here and where we're going in the future. But this is a little bit more direction oriented, which is good. But I would have to agree. I think Dave said this in the last meeting, was not to rush any of the conversations and the perspectives that we could gather from our community. And I agree. I think that this shouldn't be a rushed process. One of the concerns I think this has come up with now multiple people is making sure that we solicit all who want to participate, because it's my concern that in these focus groups that there will be certain people that have been in focus groups before or have participated before, and not to say that their input isn't valuable, but to say that I want to make sure that I'm making a well-rounded decision and hearing from all sides.
Yeah.
And with that said, and I don't know if this is an opportunity for council in the future, or maybe a wiggle room in one of our meetings, but is there an opportunity to gather up past staff that has institutional knowledge of the data, the CIP projects they were part of, to gather that history, to really get where staff is now and where staff has been before. Is that something that maybe we could do to kind of like a Q&A with them? Because I know in my line of work, the people that have, and in Westminster, people that work there years. And I'm not talking 5, 10 years. I'm talking like 20, 30 years, which you can't write all that and have all of that in a documented process. And you lose that as people leave. And so I'm just wondering if it might be prudent of us to have that discussion with people that have that institutional knowledge that may have had a different perspective. So that's my thought.
I don't know myself the answer to your question, but we can chat about it and see if there are such people, if other members of council want to add that to your docket. But can I just come back on your community engagement stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you suggest as a next step on that? And I guess I can ask this of all of you, but I'll just start with Lindsay, because you were just talking. Given we don't want to rush it, but we also want to make sure that, so if we're doing the front loading thing where you get their sense of, preferences and such to inform your discussion, we would need to get about that relatively quickly, mostly so that you have that when it's time for you to have those conversations. I think we have a couple of months. Doing engagement during, November and December kind of takes longer just because the holidays, and you don't want to be a complete, we want to be respectful of people's time and their family time. So it would take longer because of that. So that's why I had the 2 months. Is that something that makes sense to you, or does even that feel too rushed to get that front loaded stuff, the front loaded information?
I think that's okay. I think we're landing in the budget process, right? That's driven by where we're at. And so I would assume that our deadline would have to be around June, as far as really honing in on where we are with our budget process, for us to start then really diving into those conversations for a 2022 process. So I understand there's kind of a tight window, but I'm asking for just a longer process. Yeah, just a longer process as far as I don't think it necessarily has to be 2 months. If it takes longer and we feel like we have enough information, then we can move forward with that. But if we're still I don't feel like I have enough information, maybe go into another month or 2.
Sure, and sort of do what we call adaptive management of the engagement process. Yeah, I think that is an overall strategy makes sense. What do others of you think about? Do you all want to be a part of helping inform what the questions and conversations look like, or could we pick 2 of you, and maybe again 2 who have fundamentally opposing perspectives on this, to help guide that, so that the rest of you had confidence? Yep, Anita.
I'd be happy to do it. I'd be happy to help.
Okay, Dave, what do you think?
I wanted to give a thought of what I don't want to happen in this. I don't want it to be like, here's your 3 options. Do you want to pay a lot, or kind of a lot?
Right.
I want some actual opportunity for some real feedback.
Yeah.
I think that if you're going to have members of council, and it's not all of council, you absolutely need to have some opposing views in it. And frankly, what really would be valuable is to get some feedback from some of the concerns that we've heard from the residents over this period of time where we've gotten to this point. In a way that we're saying, okay, well, we understand, this is too much for you guys to bear. So what are some solutions? So I'm not exactly sure how you get at that, but I think we need a good mechanism to get good feedback. And I don't know what that is, but I also don't want it to be just, like I said, here's your 4 solutions that really are kind of all the same thing.
Right, or yeah, small, medium, large of the single question.
Yeah.
I think that's why you'll come up with the ideas, and that's why we're trying to identify as many levers as we can, so you can have slightly more complex and integrated questions. Herb, what do you think?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts on, my
Yeah.
big thing is to engage as much with the public in person. Understanding that with the numbers that we have seen, even just from last night till tonight, went from a 395 to 418 today. We are absolutely going 100 miles an hour the wrong direction. So we don't have any way to project when a sit down capability with people to actually see them face to face.
Yeah.
We get more open dialogue typically there than we do with a survey. It's going to happen. And if we need to defer in order to try to do that, I'm okay with that. But I will tell you, I think you're wasting your time if you try to get down to 1 or 2 council members to do this, because you're not going to get full buy-in.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty of that
Just
statement.
stop dancing around the subject. You have a split council, and if you don't get everybody's input, you're not going to get buy-in.
Okay. So one option, council, is we don't take action on this right now, and you carry on, and maybe you'll have a better sense of what you want to know from people after you get through your rate conversation, because I'm telling you, it's a juicy one. All that stuff that y'all want to talk about, those are things the community wants to talk about as well. You might have a better sense after that next one. And if you're not concerned about the timeline, we can let it ride for at least one of these conversations, and we can ask this question again. My interest is making sure that you're getting what you need from the community at a time that is meaningful to both you and the community. So whatever you prefer is what we should do. I don't myself anticipate having a role in this, so it's not relevant to me directly in any way. Yeah, Dave.
Heather, keep in mind, these meetings is not just for council. That's why they're open to the public, and the people are able to listen in and gain information that they don't know before.
Right.
So this is an education time for more than just the 7 members.
Yep. Okay. Dave?
I just fully want to support what the mayor just said.
Okay.
And I said this before, as far as like, I don't want to rush this. And I think that one of the things that has happened between our last meeting and today, and from even yesterday, today, to the mayor's point, is our numbers keep climbing. And I really want face-to-face interaction. And that was, part of the reason that I don't want to rush it. Earlier, when we talked about this before, I brought up the holiday season. So I still think that that's an indicator, but it's far less of an indicator than what's going on with COVID right now, when you have, one half of our city or more in a much more stringent situation than the other half, and the other half still going in the wrong direction as far as COVID's concerned. So I think that's a very valid point that the mayor makes. And I think, I don't think it hurts to kind of slow on this.
So given what I've heard, does it make sense that we will do the 2 rate conversations, one on water and one on wastewater, and then maybe have this conversation again and do nothing in the meantime? Is that your preference? I see at least 4 of you nodding. Yep. Okay. The rest of you, John, you can live with that? You didn't nod either way. Do you want to share your thoughts just so we have them?
See, I actually have a different opinion, I guess. I don't want to rush things, obviously, but I mean, people are very concerned about this right now. I don't want to drag it out. I think people need to express their opinions. We need to reach out quickly. And I actually feel differently than the group right now. I feel like people are pretty upset. I hear that regularly, and I want to probably act on this sooner rather than later. I think we need to get their input and have a mechanism for them to communicate that with us now and as soon as possible, not postpone it until down the road. I don't think that I don't support that, but whatever the group wants to do, I'll follow that. So thank you.
Okay.
I think that John has a really good valid point, and normally I would agree. I think my concern is I don't want to appear like I've seen some situations, not in this council, but in other councils in, surrounding us, where they've went through some big decisions under these COVID constraints, and it kind of, it made people upset because they feel like, hey, you're not accessible right now. So I agree with what John's saying as far as like, it needs to be addressed, but I also want to make sure that it's accessible. So I don't know what the right in between is, but I think I feel both ways. So like, I agree with what John's saying, but I also agree with the mayor. And again, I don't know what the right answer is and how we address it, but you know, they are both valid concerns.
Catherine, thoughts?
Yeah, I see where John's coming from. And I agree that we need an answer quickly, but on the other hand, I want to make sure that we're really listening to the public and we're in person with the public when we're listening to them. I've heard that over and over from the public. They want to be in person and they want to be able to talk to us in person, but this is not the time to be gathering in person with our numbers the way they are. So I struggle the same way you do, John, which makes me think, but I think going slower makes more sense right now. I know it's not the answer everybody wants. I don't know.
It's tough, and I wonder, John, if what the issue that you've raised is somewhat mitigated by the fact that we're entering into the fall. And I mean, granted, it was like 80 degrees in November last year, but that maybe the impact that people are experiencing of water rates in this watering season will start to diminish as we go into the holidays, as theoretically, as the weather cools. And so maybe that softens that impact a little bit and gives you a little bit more time. What do you think?
Well, that's fine. I mean, I think that the consensus of the group is kind of out there. I expressed kind of my thoughts, and I think it's not probably exactly in lockstep with the whole group. So I'll abide by the wishes of the group. So thank you.
So given that it's not perfect for all the reasons that you all have described, it sounds like the will of council at this time is to wait on this, get through these rate workshops, and then see where we are. Because then you'll know what you want to ask. Maybe you'll already converge on a couple of options and want to go right out and just get feedback on those options. Maybe you'll have a better sense of which of the levers are interesting questions, which are you really open to thinking about, to Anita's point. Does that sound about right, Catherine?
Yeah, so what you're proposing is that we basically go through 2 more sessions and then we basically have this conversation again. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
And so we have a session on November 5th and then we have a session, when's the session after that?
I want to say the 17th of November, shortly thereafter.
So it's about a month.
And here's my I want to let you know what I'm expecting. So the way we have them scheduled is water rates, costs and rates for one, and wastewater costs and rates for one. And what I think is really going to happen is some of water costs and rates in the first one, and the rest of water costs and rates in the second one, and then the wastewater, because the wastewater is vastly more straightforward once we do all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, then you're pushing up against Thanksgiving, right? So then whatever decision you would want to make at that time about how to engage the community then is much more directly and critically influenced by the holidays. But if your hair's not on fire to get this resolved, you know, lickety split, we have time to sort this out once you have more information after those discussions.
Okay.
Does that seem like an adequate plan, given that it's imperfect and COVID is ruining all the good things?
Yeah.
Anita?
I mean, I think it's fine. We've spent 42 minutes now talking about this, and I think the point that John brings up is a good one, that like right now, water rates is a really divisive issue in our community. And there's a lot of claims that are going around that aren't accurate in regards to what even happened with our water rates, why they were done, where the money goes, all of these things. And so, you know, my hope is some of that immediacy that John is asking for is being answered just through these sessions, right? And some of that like need that maybe will help diffuse some of the division within our community, and people be like, wow, I don't agree with their choice, but at least I get that it wasn't like crazy, can happen, right? Like maybe that can happen, or maybe people's like understanding, thinking about, wow, my turn on my tap, I never really thought where the water comes from. There's a lot more that goes into it. Maybe that happens, but fundamentally we have decisions in front of us, right? And I just think that with COVID, with us not all being on the same page yet, with really truly wanting to have buy-in with this organization, with wanting to know what do we need to learn from our residents that's going to be meaningful to us. I do think we can wait those 2 weeks. But I don't want to dismiss John's comments at all, because I think they're really accurate. There's like pain in our community and division and confusion, and people want an outlet for that, right? They need to express their frustration, and I think I appreciate him wanting to provide that avenue right now. But I would remind anyone listening right now that you can partake the same way that Heather just read those questions that came in, that you can participate, not in real time right now, but those can be memorialized, brought back to us as council, and we'll be digesting them as we're having these conversations. And so maybe it's a yes and, I guess.
Okay, excellent. All right, council, any last thoughts on that? I really appreciate your commitment to this issue and to hearing your community and representing them. I don't know if they know it, but I think they're lucky to have such a honestly, diverse councils. That's democracy at work. It just brings me joy. Nerd. So coming out of this, it sounds like our plan is we're going to talk about rates, and it's going to be so juicy. It's going to blow your mind. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. Looking at you, all of you. And that's at our next meeting. And then wastewater will come after that. I think there'll be a pretty blurry line between those two. And at the end of those two conversations, we'll revisit this again. In the meantime, if you have additional questions that pop into your head, you should shoot them to me or to staff. Community members, again, you can go to the website, and there's lots of questions there. There's a comment form where you can put your questions in there. We'll do what we did today. Every meeting will capture what we've heard. The summary of our previous workshop is also uploaded there, so you can look at that if you want to revisit the fun that was the first conversation. And we'll do one of those again for each one of these meetings. Anita, I haven't forgotten about your question to staff about if we can get some of this written in advance and what that might look like. So we'll chat about that. And I think
Or almost as a recap, just even if you can't do it in advance, summary of what the last two meetings are.
That'd be cool.
Technical, because I had a whole page of questions from the last one. And looking at them, I was like, why was I asking that? And
fair enough.
I mean, yeah, so I think that I need to have that.
Okay. Yeah, we'll
Grade
figure out
Mayor, what she used to be. I can't process. I can't retain it all. So
fair enough. All right. Anyone else have any last thoughts or requests before we send you back on your lives? Thank you for your patience and perseverance, particularly those of you who are ready for the cost conversations and thought this one was a slog. I hope you like the next one, and I look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, be safe out there. These are tricky times. Take care.
Have a good evening, everyone.